Hello, I'm Neil Bradley, Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and welcome back to our Common Grounds series. For those of you joining for the first time, Common Grounds is a monthly series where we bring together a Republican and a Democrat member of Congress, and we talk about an issue over a cup of coffee to try to work through and see how we tackle some of the nation's biggest challenges. We're pleased to join in this effort from our friends at Compass Coffee. Compass Coffee puts the grounds in our Common Ground series, and they're a locally owned DC-based coffee roastery founded by two former Marines. Don't worry if you're not close to one of their 12 locations today. They're expanding throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. I urge you to give them a try. Today, the topic is energy and the environment, and particularly climate change. We couldn't be joined by two better members of Congress to engage in this discussion than Representative Scott Peters from California's 52nd District and Representative Adam Kinzinger from Illinois' 16th Congressional District. Both of these members got their start in politics at the local level. Representative Kinzinger served in local government and then in the Air Force before being elected to Congress, where he is now serving in his sixth term. Representative Peters also started out in local politics at the San Diego City Council and then became chairman of the San Diego Unified Port District. He's now in his fifth term in Congress. Joining me later on in the program will be our partners at the Illinois Chamber of Commerce and the San Diego Regional Chamber, who will have questions to kick off our question and answer series. So let's jump right in and get started. Representative Peters, Representative Kinzinger, welcome to Common Grounds.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So we always start with the toughest question of all, and there's no wrong answer here, but we call it Common Grounds, and we got the pictures of the coffee beans in the back because we know so often in life and in politics that getting together over a cup of coffee in person or virtually is how you get to know people. It's how you break down barriers. I happen to be a coffee drinker myself. I take it straight black coffee, always have. How about each of you? Representative Peters, are you a coffee drinker?
4 espresso shots before my workout every morning. And then one more in the day. Yeah. It's how I keep my bubbly personality.
Representative Kinzinger.
You know, Jesus invented coffee black, and that's how I drink it every morning. like God intended it to be.
That's exactly right. Well, see, we've already found common ground here. It's just a question of the difference between the strength of the shot, I suppose.
Right. Yeah.
So one of the reasons that we were so excited to host both of you, particularly for a discussion around energy and climate issues, is because both of you don't just talk about the issues. You both have a proven track record of introducing legislation that's been able to draw bipartisan support and actually become law. So Representative Peters, the Use It Act on carbon sequestration and capture last year, Representative Kinzinger on energy resilience issues. Talk to us a little bit about how you came to this issue and how you find working across the aisle in terms of coming up with solutions. And we'll go with Kinzinger first, since he didn't have any espresso this morning. We'll start with him first.
Well, thanks. And Neil, it's good to see you. Scott, you too. And, look, I think the Energy and Commerce Committee, a lot of the times we'll get on the news or in the media when we disagree, but there's really a lot of agreeable stuff that gets through. I mean, there's been some low points and there have been higher points right now, but I think, it's not really a great time in Congress to do things together, but we're still working. And so whether it's on things like energy resiliency, we talk about nuclear issues, even to an extent when you get into climate change and we talk about energy preservation, how to use less energy. So energy savings performance contracts as an example. You just come to realize that there's a lot, the vast majority of Americans, it's funny, the more I've been kind of studying about this, you look at one end of any issue, right? Whatever that issue is. And in many cases, the parties represent the extreme polar edge of that issue. But the vast majority of Americans will fall into a party because they have only two choices, but usually they fall in between on a lot of those issues. And so that's kind of how I started getting involved in the areas of, okay, on energy, where can we actually work together to make real achievements instead of just having political talking points. So it's been a fun and interesting climb over 11 years. We've had some success, and hopefully we can get back to that a little more than kind of the moment we're in. That's for sure.
Congressman Peters,
I think I agree, and I think a lot about climate change, and we often hear it characterized as the next world war or something on the order of sending men to the moon. Our country never did that kind of thing with one political party, and for us to have success, we really need to get everyone in the game, and so that's been my focus. I mean, I frankly I agree with a lot of the aggressive moves of California, but I understand that Washington, D.C. isn't Sacramento. And for us to make progress, we have to work together. And I'm really proud. I think the two probably most significant climate bills that Congress passed were put in very quietly into the end of the year spending bills last year. One was the Use It Act, which you mentioned, which is a carbon capture and research bill. The other was on hydrofluorocarbons, which are very, very dangerous climate agents in coolants. And because, by the way, industry helped us on both sides, we were able to make significant progress in that. And I think we'll have a real impact. It's so easy to get caught up in the speeches, but I think Adam would agree that often the toughest hits you take are from your own party, the extremists who don't want you to work on the others with the other side. But I see it as indispensable and critical for us to work together. We're going to solve these big problems.
Tell me, hey, Neil, I want to add to that too, and Scott's right. But, let's take the issue of nuclear, for instance. And, I think there's actually, widespread agreement on the importance of, SMRs, so new small modular reactors in the future. There's widespread agreement on preserving existing nuclear infrastructure. You're never going to achieve any kind of climate goal without doing that, because it's, high baseload power. But yet there's still, on both sides kind of arrested by this extreme belief on nuclear. And there's a lot to get done. There's a lot of really common ground on that. And so I think that's just one example. It's why I have my preserving, existing infrastructure bill. And it's one example of just, all these different kind of subsections that maybe we won't agree on a full picture. But that doesn't mean that, whether you look at like immigration reform, it doesn't mean that we should just be quiet. It means maybe we should try to find out where we can actually solve something.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up nuclear, and the debate, when I hear it, feels like it's centered on nuclear from the 1980s, right? And nuclear looks very different today. You mentioned, these modular nuclear reactors. This isn't a question of the big nuclear plants of old, or at least not exclusively. Is the technology advancement and the changes in ways that things like nuclear function, does that ultimately change the political debate that's going on in Congress? Congressman Peters, do you think that's affecting where the discussion is headed?
Well, I hope so. I think projections that get us to net zero emissions by mid-century really all depend on on nuclear playing a role. So let's be realistic about that. If we're serious about dealing with climate change, nuclear can play a big role. And I think, as Adam said, the SMR technologies are something we should support. My colleague Elaine Luria has the Nuclear Energy Leadership Act. She's a Democrat out of Virginia that would help us take advantage of that technology. I think we can also think about what to do with the existing waste, whether there's a way we can reprocess that, because we're sure having a hard time agreeing on where to put it. I think Adam and I both support the Yucca disposal facility, but I'm not sure that that can overcome the political hurdles. And there's also a really important foreign policy component to this. One of our biggest challenges internationally is keeping really cheap coal from being burned by the developing world. Imagine if we could export American nuclear technology as part of a foreign policy that would attend to climate change. I think that would be good all the way around. So I think we have to discuss this a lot more seriously than we have. And I do see bipartisan support for it.
let's go down that angle a second. And Congressman Kinzinger, you spend a lot of time in foreign affairs and national security issues, and there does seem to be this connection that Congressman Peters just brought up. When we think about a place like Africa, which is going to be kind of the next Asia in terms of a rise of the middle class and their energy needs and what they're going to demand in terms of electricity, it does seem like that there's an opportunity to be the energy supplier to the world. And it's either going to be us or China. And so is a lot of how we think about confronting these energy issues here also come into play in the geopolitics of the future?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, when we deal with all these issues, we kind of get in this siloed of, whatever America does, somehow the rest of the world's going to adopt, and it's just not the facts, right? So I think in dealing with things like climate change, one of the questions is, okay, if America is going to make some significant, decrease in carbon output, which we actually have over the last number of years, but if we're going to, tie ourselves to an extent by doing that, we have to make sure that our, in essence, biggest competitors are doing the same thing. And we know that China, for instance, is building, I don't know the number, it's something like over 100 coal power fire plants right now. And so if you look at, nuclear, let's take, for instance, what we saw in Germany. We love the Germans, they're great friends, but they shut down after Fukushima all of their nuclear power plants, at least most of them, and they now have to build a pipeline called Nord Stream 2 from Russia so that they can still claim that they're net carbon zero, even though they're going to now be importing gas from Russia. What does that do to the geopolitics? Well, it makes Europe much more reliant on Russian energy, which, as we saw even recently with the, with some of the acts of Russia, is certainly not a good thing. And plus, of course, a growing Africa. So this is, I think, where if we could kind of come to this agreement of let's work hard to make sure we're reducing our carbon, let's work hard to export American leadership and technology in that process, because on the nuclear side of things, for instance, if we don't do it, the rest of the world is going to be like, fine, we're going to China, we're going to go to Russia for our technology. France is great, but they're fine. They'll have the export controls and the concerns we have, but China and Russia sure won't. So it's our decision. And I think it's a big and important part of all of these energy debates.
So I want to bring this a little closer to home now. We take energy for granted. Like you walk, you get up in the morning, you walk over, you flip the light switch, the light comes on, and we get taken aback when that doesn't happen. Whether it was California last summer, Congressman Peters, I've seen projections for this summer about the electricity grid and what's going to happen, or Texas, very different situation, but the same token, energy, the lights wouldn't come on this past winter. How do we think about the electric grid, resiliency, and meeting our energy demands, as well as climate? How do those things fit together? And what investments do we need to be making, or how should we be thinking about making those investments to make sure that we have the reliability that we all want, but that we're also modernizing to address these climate issues? Congressman Peters, since you're in the heart of it there in California, you've experienced this firsthand. How do you think about it?
Well, I do think there's a lot of bipartisan support for supporting the grid, whether it's resiliency, security, or efficiency. Efficiency is a climate change issue as well. If we can use the less energy we use, the more we deal with climate change. And I think that's an opportunity to make the grid smarter and better. I think we really have to invest in resiliency. Markets play a role and government plays a role. I think you saw in California, maybe the markets needed a little bit of a boost to be able to deal with that heat. In Texas, I think the government let folks down by not imposing resiliency standards on all these facilities. But I think the important thing is, I often laugh at my colleagues in the Energy and Commerce Committee who decry California but fail to mention Texas. I mean, there's a lot of issues that we need to work on together. And I do see a lot of support, and I think Adam would back this up, for investing in the grid and making sure that it's ready. I think we should take advantage of that moment.
Yeah, look, I'll say on that too. I'd say I generally agree with everything Scott said. I want to add a couple things. So, technology is going to be really important. So yes, energy storage. So we can talk about things like batteries, but let's be clear on a couple of concerns there, which is right now, the projection is even the best kind of energy grid storage battery system not going to preserve a lot of electricity for a long time unless we have some rapid advancements in that technology, which I know is being worked at in national labs and private sector and everything. But one of my big concerns, and I actually have a bill addressing some of this resiliency, is when it comes to critical minerals. Every, in essence, solar panel that's built, every battery that's built has a piece of that in China. And I'm not here to point fingers at China over and over again, but we saw what happened in the pandemic when there was a explicit threat to cut off PPE, as an example. And that's a real concern. I mean, that's something that, when you talk about 300 pounds of the F-35 actually has minerals that are critical that are sourced out of China. That's a concern. So I think when it comes to storage, how do we advance beyond needing some of those minerals that are exclusively there? How do we open up some of our mining here, which we'd have to fight some of the environmental groups on in order to have that resiliency? But the other thing is, let's not punish natural gas in this process. Natural gas is very relatively clean burning. In many cases, we do have concerns with like flaring at production sites, so we can use that both on export, as we've done well with LNG exports, also exports American leadership. But when it comes to like what you saw in Texas or potentially California, you have these natural gas peaker plants. I have a few in my district. They run maybe 3 or 4 days a year, but they're there to be spun up in the case that there is a massive surge in energy need and keep the grid from failing. And the problem is, if you go after natural gas as an entity because of some belief that, natural gas, if we get rid of it, it's going to force us all to go on, hamster wheels and windmills, which I'm supportive of windmills. But if you do that, you're going to end up where you have these massive surges in energy and nobody there to cover the cost of that, or nobody there to cover the energy needs. So I think when you look at peaking, when you look at natural gas, those are all really important to keep into effect too. And again, also the cybersecurity side of it, we saw this with the Colonial Pipeline. This is just the beginning of these kinds of attacks, I hate to tell you. And we unfortunately need to be prepared.
Let me just, if I could just react to a couple things Adam said. By the way, if there's a hamster wheel technology, I need to know about that. I haven't heard about that yet. But two things. One is on storage. I should have mentioned that one of the things with the grid we want to do is more interstate high voltage transmission. We talk a lot about renewables, but one of the problems with renewables is they're generated in places like Arizona, and they want to be used in places like Detroit. And we've done a bad job of connecting the grid. I have a bill, the Power On Act, that would provide FERC backstop authority. So if states and locals get in the way of this, the federal government could come in and actually issue the permits. I think that would be useful. And I'm going to take a look at Adam's bill on critical minerals. On natural gas too, I think we need to be really constructive about it. I have certainly acknowledged that natural gas burns a heck of a lot cleaner than coal. That's good news. But the methane leaks across the system have to be dealt with. And that's one regulatory area where I think the industry understands where this is going. A 20-year, $7 billion shipment of our contract between Brownsville and France was canceled by France because they consider our natural gas too dirty. That was a liquefied natural gas contract. We need to get our own act in order, and I think I've come up with a way in the Methane Act to do that based on performance, not based on technology. And I'm trying to get some support for that as well. I think that's a way to deal with natural gas, which isn't going away. I agree with Adam. It's hooked up to a lot of houses and a lot of power plants, and in the near term, we just have to make it cleaner.
Hey, Neil, just real quick, you know what's amazing is Scott and I agree on most of this stuff, but leadership, at least in my party, I think in their party too, so vested in the politics of the back and forth that in many cases it's just impossible to find these common solutions and get them done. Maybe that'll be a whole separate question, but I'm just, as he's speaking, I'm sitting there like, man, there's 800 things that, if people would just unleash, we would be able to achieve a lot. Maybe then we'd run out of stuff to argue about. That could be another problem.
Adam, it's interesting. That's exactly where I was going next, and maybe a little bit of an unfair question. But listening to you, you said there's a role for windmills and solar and even hamster wheels, and we'll have to figure out what the hamster wheel is. But the things that Republicans aren't normally associated with. And Congressman Peters is talking about natural gas and nuclear and things that many Democrats, at least that the perception is that they're not associated with. But the reality of you two talking is, yeah, we got to do a little bit of this, we got to do a little bit of that. We can't rule anything out. We have to pull it all together. How do we make the conversation you're having the conversation each of your respective parties is having? And do you have any thoughts about how you engage your colleagues? Or you can throw it back on us, how the business community ought to engage your colleagues on these issues.
Adam's been here longer. Give me the answer.
Okay. Look, I especially with kind of the last year and particularly the last 6 months, I've thought a lot about this. And I've come to realize in looking at a lot of kind of scientific social science data and everything that really this idea that the American people are radicalizing and are polarizing, I don't think is really supported by social science. I think the reality is parties are. I mean, think about the olden days. There used to be pro-life, pro-choice Democrats, pro-life, pro-choice Republicans. So all within a spectrum of a party, you can have differences. Now, if you fall short of whatever talk show host or whatever determines as conservative for that day, I'll speak on my party. You're a rhino or you're not sufficiently conservative, even though that definition has changed. And so what's happened is these parties have radicalized, and with a country so closely divided, I mean, almost 50-50 in terms of how they're voting, although I don't think it's 50-50 in terms of Republican and Democrat. The vast majority of Americans still legitimately consider themselves independent. But with the control of government, every 2 years, by the way, the United States is the country with the shortest election cycles, I think, of any democracy. So every 2 years. Most have, 3, 4, 6 years, something like that. And so we're constantly in this fundraising / election moment. And so there is no incentive to find common ground, because if you believe that your side is right and you believe that your points are going to motivate your voters, there's no incentive to fix a solution like immigration. I think if we'd have done border security and dealt with the 15 million immigrants that are here illegally and fixed any number of processes, 80% of America would be in agreement with that. But we haven't done enough on the whole issue because it works well for both sides to turn out their base. So what's the answer? Yes. I mean, look, I think members of Congress, look at Scott and I, we work together well. We're trying to do the best we can. But I think the bottom line is the American people have to demand better. They have to vote in primaries. And the business community, I think, let me give a shout out to the business community really quick particularly on January 6th. The institution held, but it was a disastrous, terrible, awful day. And many in the business community stood up, and despite not having any real need to be involved in politics, because the job of the business community is, to make money and provide jobs, there were a lot of businesses and corporations that made points about stuff like January 6th is totally unacceptable. So I think there's a role there. And I think, finding solutions, if you kind of competing interest, if you can find common ground to present to Republicans and Democrats, we're always in to hear those solutions. But the bottom line is you have to demand better of your representatives and vote that way. That's what I believe. I would love to see every member of Congress do better. But truthfully, a lot of members of Congress just react to who's going to vote for them.
Yeah. I also say, too, that one of the structural issues that we have are these single party primaries. One of the things that gives me a little bit of leeway is the fact that with the top 2 primary system, independents can vote for me. And I think that's very helpful. Basically the Democrats in my district know that this district's never going to produce a Bernie Sanders or a Ted Cruz for that matter. And they want someone to solve problems. And I think that the other thing I would keep in mind is that Americans are desperate for the government to work together. They don't like us being divided. And to some extent, we're a reflection of America, but we can show some leadership by coming together and working together. So I've dug for Republicans to work with me on these various issues. It's sort of a one-by-one hunt and peck operation because, as you said, it's not motivated by leadership. Leadership has their own concerns, but I have to give it up for people like Adam, who've shown a tremendous amount of political courage. And Adam served in the war, so I say political courage. And what passes for courage in Washington is nothing compared to what you face on the battlefield. And I'd like to see more of it. Frankly, I think people like Adam deserve a lot of credit for standing up for what he sees as right, even though it's not the politically expedient thing to do. And I hope the business community can recognize those people and continue to support them, because I guess these big problems don't get solved by polarization and extremism. They get solved by listening to the person you may not agree with right off the bat and trying to find common ground. That's where the real courage takes place, not giving a fiery speech to your own people.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
So I think it was you, Congressman Peters, early on talked about the Use It Act and some legislation that got wrapped in to the end of the year omnibus. And at the chamber, we've actually called that package of energy bills and the HFC phase down, which is worth about half a degree in reduction in global temperatures once implemented, and actually benefits U.S. industry globally, is perhaps the most significant energy package in a decade and the most significant climate legislation to become law probably ever. And so but no one knows about it, right? So is that the way that these big things get solved? Is someone works them out kind of behind the scenes and they get stuck into a bigger bill that and everyone pays attention to that bigger bill, but we make progress? Should we be talking about those things more? Does it help both of you in finding common ground to kind of point back to where you've had success in the past? Congressman Kinzinger, are we failing in kind of highlighting where you guys are coming together?
Yeah, I think everybody's failing on that. And I think part of it is, if you're a news agency, the Peters Kinzinger energy bill passage is not going to be front page. It may not even make that news, right? Because it's not going to get clicks. And I'm guilty of it. We all, I think, click on the outrageous stories. Here's an example. And I there's certainly examples on the other side of the aisle, but I'm going to tell you, as somebody that's a Republican, I notice it on my side. And, some news station was running a 10-minute story on, some outrage that we still have to wear masks on the floor of the House of Representatives. Let me be clear, most of us are vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated, that's your risk. I think we shouldn't wear masks on the floor of the House of Reps anymore. But let me tell you, it doesn't matter. It really is not. I'm not losing sleep over it. I'm not outraged over it. It's going to get fixed at some point, right? And yet these news like that's all they're covering. And they have members of Congress come on and talk about what an outrage it is that they went through a metal detector and wore a mask. And that's what sells. And so I think it's a failure of leaders to talk about, but it's a failure all around. And I think the key is all of this is going to be fixed, not by some speech me or Scott are going to give, and not by, some speech that you, Neil, can give, even though you're an amazing speaker. It's going to come by the American people waking up and demanding better. And frankly, not making Washington, D.C. and government the center of their everyday focus. Right. If you think about, a republic was intended to be 700,000 people today voting for one person that's going to take their interest to DC so that they can live their lives. And then 2 years later, they'll evaluate if that person was the right person and then make a decision again. DC was never intended to be this focus of everyday outrage consistently and constantly. It's getting closer to a direct democracy, which our founders outright rejected in favor of a republic. So that's a little, I'm getting into a lot of theory at that moment, but I do think it's going to take the American people waking up, doing a little meditating, realizing that it's not worth shortening your life over things you can't control, and us pushing forward, not the outrage, but kind of the good stories too.
Well, amen to that. We're going to try to do our part at the U.S. Chamber, because there are good stories to tell and good partnerships like the one we're witnessing right here that exist that we need to highlight. And the business community needs to respect more of our members, right? We expect, we know you're going to disagree. I think we ought to have the expectation that you can find some things to agree on. Right. You've both certainly met that expectation today. Right. One of the great things about the business community, and this really builds off Congressman Kinzinger, the idea of a republic, it's also a federation. So We're the U.S. chamber, but there are state chambers in all states and local chambers in every community. And we're privileged to partner with them every day. And two of them are joining us with a question for each of you. So we're going to go first to Todd Mage, who's the president and CEO of the Illinois Chamber of Commerce. And not surprisingly, he has a question for Congressman Kinzinger. Todd.
Hello, Representative Kinzinger. Adam, we're very, very happy that you're participating in this important dialogue with the U.S. Chamber and really the Chamber Federation on critical issues impacting Illinois and the nation. And our question is about investment in our vital transportation infrastructure. You know how important it is to the economy of your district and the state of Illinois. Certainly it's roads, bridges, and transit, but it's also investment in our critical waterways, air, and rail assets that all come together to have the maximum impact on the Illinois economy. So our question is, the president has put together a very aggressive program, overreach in some ways, and we don't like the funding mechanisms he rolled out to go ahead and offer to pay for it. But the question is, how do we pay for investment in our vital transportation? Issues like tolling of interstates, not always that popular, but it's got to be on the table, we believe. Public-private partnerships are also very, very important, and I think part of the solution moving forward. So we're very interested in your thoughts on how we can move forward with adequate investment in our vital transportation network.
Well, thanks, Todd, for the question, and I fully agree. I mean, since I've been in Congress, calling for an infrastructure investment from the federal government and fixing the system so that we're not here every year, every 2 years, painting roads black or just, mild fix because we want to say we did something, but we didn't do anything real. And as, I've traveled around a lot in this capacity as a congressman, and you see countries that do infrastructure wrong and right. The countries that do it right, you see things like public-private partnerships. For instance, in Australia, you see things like, tolling of certain interstates, right? I think that's very important. I think we have to be honest, too, about the gas tax in this country. It's at 19 cents, I think, right now, or 18. I always forget the number. But the bottom line is, when this was passed in the mid-90s, the average car got maybe 20 miles a gallon, and now it gets, 35 to 40. People cost more, and products cost more. So the average family is actually spending about half of what they used to spend to drive on the interstate system. Those are the kinds of numbers we need to put in front of the American people and say, look, you're paying less than you used to pay. Somebody's got to pay for this. So I think putting an inflationary device on the gas tax to keep up with current day, you may have to have a raise to make up for that loss since 95. And then figuring out, of course, how to make electric vehicles pay their fair share as well. So for electric vehicles, you may have something like a per year registration fee or a per mile tax that maybe you don't put on cars that are kind of naturally fuel burning. Whatever it is, the bottom line is we need to pay for this infrastructure. We need a broad infrastructure plan. We need to fix it for the next generation. And we need to not forget things like you mentioned, a mile away from where I'm sitting is a big Illinois River, having the rivers and waterways and railways and airports set as well. So thanks for your question. Hopefully we can get this done.
All right, Congressman Peters, we're going to your hometown now. Jerry Sanders is the president and CEO of the San Diego Regional Chamber, and he's got a question for you.
Congressman Peters, last year, $300 million was appropriated in the USMCA implementation bill to address transport and pollution impacting the Tijuana River Valley and the San Diego region, but these funds have yet to be put to use. You've mentioned your interest in bioenergy to carbon capture and storage projects in addressing long-standing wastewater challenges along the U.S.-Mexico border. What is the next step in advancing these water and climate solutions, and how can the business community help?
Thanks, Jerry. It's a good reminder that for all my bipartisanship and effort on energy, if I'm not representing San Diego, I'm not doing my job. And the cross-border sewage and other contamination that's happening now, it has to be one of the environmental catastrophes in the hemisphere. Border Patrol agents report that their boots are disintegrating. The Navy SEALs have to train in the new facility that we're building for them. They have to train off that facility in the water with a lot of contamination. So it's a crisis. We were actually getting some assistance from the Trump administration. We did get enough money to start to deal with it, but we're working right now on emergency measures that would stop this right now. And as the new administration takes over, we've made it a priority with the EPA. So we're going to be working with the local electeds and with local activist community to make sure that we're addressing it. And some of the things you talked about in terms of energy are long-term solutions that we want to be in the mix. But we're going to be on that every month and hope to be able to present good news relatively soon.
I love bringing in our local chamber partners because it is a reminder, right, that there are all the big issues that you guys debate in Washington, that we come to see you on in Washington. It really, the rubber meets the road at the local level and where people live. And the work that you're doing actually makes a difference in a lot of people's lives. And when Washington fails to address these problems, Washington's failure makes a difference in people's lives in not such a good way. We have a couple questions from our audience members today. And one of them is I think the first one's going to get us back to our energy topic and climate. And so we have a question from Brian Morales of ProCal Lighting Incorporated, who asks, how can we develop a faster way to our ambitious energy and climate policy goals through public-private partnerships? How can small businesses participate in this effort? So public-private partnerships, Congressman Kinzinger, you mentioned that in your response to Todd's question. How do you see that playing out in the climate space? And also, how about small businesses? What's their role here? Congressman Kinzinger?
Yeah, I think it's a big role. So we've already seen that the free market and business has really kind of led the way on this. So a lot of the carbon reduction we've seen, which from what I understand actually exceeds what was predicted when I think it was the Waxman-Markey bill it didn't pass, but they had predicted if you pass this, it'll have this much. We've actually exceeded that. And a lot of that is because consumer demand reacts to things like, green, there's an investment, there's an incentive out there, generally speaking, to come up with cleaner, better, more efficient ways to do things. We talk about like energy savings performance contracts. These are private companies that go into, the federal government's the biggest user of energy in this country. So they can go into federal buildings, federal areas, find ways to save money, and then they get paid back based on the savings. So that's one example. And I think the bottom line is, if we think that the government alone can address these issues, I think Scott would agree with me, we'd be wrong. I mean, all you got to do is see how the Soviet Union, went about some of its economic goals without any private sector, and it didn't do well at all. And so I think the incentives are out there for small business and for public-private partnerships. That needs to be, the public-private part is something we need to be constantly thinking about. And I also think we need to celebrate areas where it has worked, so people can see that, and it also incentivizes further investment development. So I think this is not going to be solved by governments alone. Actually, I don't think it's going to be solved by governments. It'll be solved by the private sector coming in with the demands of consumers, investing in what people want and getting this thing done.
Congressman,
I agree. I totally agree. I think there's a notion that we talk about among Democrats called a green bank. But actually, I like the concept of a more broad infrastructure bank, because there's so much private money out there looking for returns right now that why wouldn't we use government money and leverage that private investment in ways that allow the private sector to select what projects they think will work, which we know markets are a better way, the most efficient way to allocate resources. We should take advantage of that. Some estimates say that up to $350 billion of our total infrastructure bill could be funded through things that generate fees, whether it's putting hydropower on dams or building roads with tolls. I think there's a lot of opportunity for that, and I totally agree with Adam. I think that's an area where we should not consider this sort of something we do to make the deal. We should consider this a really fundamental opportunity for deploying infrastructure, including climate-friendly infrastructure. And I would, by the way, say on the decrease in carbon dioxide, it's true but we lose that benefit if we don't deal with methane. So I'm like a broken record on that. We have to. That's one government regulation we're going to need to impose, and quick.
So I want to build off the PPP, and both of you have talked about both the infrastructure in the traditional roads, bridges, infrastructure sense, but also the energy and climate infrastructure we need to build. One of the complaints that we hear from businesses who are either trying to invest in that new infrastructure or build that new infrastructure is the amount of time and the uncertainty at the front end around the permitting process. And I wonder if this is an area where, you know, the so-called left and the so-called right come together, because they may want to build different things, but they both actually want to build them. And permitting is standing in the way. Is this a untapped area for potential bipartisan agreement? Congressman Peters, you're smiling, so we'll let you go first.
I mean, I just laugh at California. God bless our good-hearted people, but we regulate the heck out of some of the most fundamentally environmentally friendly investments. You know, they want to build high-speed rail here, but they're going to kill it with permitting. And you know, I just think we really work against ourselves in some of these ways. Like I said, high voltage interstate transmission gets killed because states don't care, they can't agree. So this national interest is not served. So yeah, we've got to overcome that. We've got to also provide certainty in timelines. I used to always say that when I practice law, that no is the second best answer. I mean, I'd like to be able to do this project, but if I can't do it, tell me now, so I don't, you know, run out my clock and pay monthly carrying costs. I just think we have to be more responsive, and there's no reason why Democrats and Republicans can't agree. We want high standards. We want to make sure that we get a good result, but we can get there a lot quicker than I think we're used to doing. You know, more timelines, more one agency leading it rather than a bunch of agencies kind of messing it up. I think there's a lot of opportunities in that way, and I'd love to be part of streamlining to get good results, but to get them faster.
Yeah, look, we agree. I mean, I think if you look at building, and I mean, I'm still often amazed at how quickly we built an entire interstate system and then how long it takes to build a new interstate now. A quick example, there was a proposed interstate system called the Iliana Express, which would have connected near my house right now, Illinois over to Indiana. And right now, so I-80 past my house is just jam-packed with trucks and traffic. So you think about how long it takes to get on that over to Indiana, how much time idling that is by vehicles, trucks, etc. And this would have allowed a bypass, so all the big kind of inland port stuff I have here could actually take this new interstate, and it would free up traffic and less time idling from an environmental perspective. So they had proposed two different routes, one of which basically needed one bridge, one needed two bridge. But the one that needed one bridge cut 50 yards into a preserved wetland, which the federal government gave. It used to be an arsenal, the Joliet Arsenal, which they gave as a preservation, thousands and thousands and thousands of acres. But since we would have needed to take back about 50 yards of that to build the interstate one that only had the one bridge, we knew that we'd be tangled in 20 years of environmental litigation over that. So they ended up having to pick the two bridge option, which, by the way, also took out 10 additional houses that people were living in. And so then that died a slow and painful death as well. And now we have nothing, and we have trucks idling on the interstate. There's got to be some reason, and there's got to be some cooperation between speed and environment, where we're not shutting down projects over asinine things, but we're also not being reckless.
Yeah. So I actually am taking from both of your answers that yes, this actually could be an area of agreement, but one that like so many others that we've talked about today, truly has become politicized in ways that maybe no one really intended, but we kind of fell into this trap of every issue falling on one side or the other, rather than kind of resting in the middle. So that's a great segue to our next question from Cindy Hine of Associated Benefits, who asks, what are the critical success factors necessary to have bipartisan dialogue policies and energy and other issues? So we talked a little bit about this earlier, But now reflecting on this conversation, if there's something that you could do, one thing that you could change, what would you change that you think would improve the likelihood of success in dealing with some of the problems that you've mentioned? Congressman Peters, we'll let you go first.
I mean, I know Adam's been one more term than me, but I'm amazed at how well structured the Congress is to deal with problems through the committee system. That we have these, energy subcommittee of the Energy and Commerce Committee. I kind of think that if we were left to really solve a problem, that without being constrained by leadership or outside pressure, we might do better. But also, I just think that people on the outside tend to exercise veto power. So you have activists and interest groups. If they're not for it, it's hard for someone to vote against it. And I imagine that's true on the business side as well. So more of a commitment to a cultural commitment to solving problems and compromise would be helpful. I think that could be somewhat internal if the committees were more empowered through I think a pretty good system that's set up for cross-party conversation.
I'm going to save everybody 1 whole minute of your life because I'm going to make this quick. I agree with everything Scott said. I also think change the primary system. Short of that, if you're going to vote in a primary, don't vote for rock stars, vote for hard workers.
Yeah,
that'll change it.
The old adage, show horse versus workhorse. They use that term when I worked on Capitol Hill. I think both of you are workhorses, but you both show very well as well. So that's why we're pleased to have you both joining us today.
Pretty proud of my Instagram account, but it's not blowing up.
Have you recorded something on the surfboard that's behind you? Maybe that'll.
Yeah, that's what I need to do, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you got to switch it up that way. So I want to bring us to a conclusion today by going back to kind of where we began, and give each of you an opportunity to pitch each other and the audience on something that you would like to work on a bipartisan basis with activists on both sides in the energy and climate space to try to address, and give us a challenge. What is it that we can work on to encourage people to work across the aisle? What is it that we can do between industry and environmentalists to try to help solve so that we can make more progress this year? And Congressman Peters, I have a feeling it may be around methane, but I want to give you the chance to make the pitch.
Yeah. So methane accounts for about 25% of warming by some estimates. It's happening today. And to me, it's the biggest single, most important thing to take care of right now. As I said, there's business challenges with the status quo. And I went to Houston actually give a speech to an energy group. I was a little bit of a unicorn, a Democrat from California in Houston, but to tell them I want to help them get their act together on this. I think the approach is not the Obama approach, which was fine in 2016 of imposing technological standards, but to set a performance standard across the life cycle of natural gas distribution and have industry figure out how to achieve gradually decreasing limits. I've found a lot of industries open to it, but there's some parts of it, the ones who are close to the margin that have a hard time with it, we could help them. And I think that the environmentalists are open to it if I can get some Republicans on it. Love to have the help of Adam or anyone else, and particularly the business community, help us get this thing right. I think we can do it in a way that will make sense for everyone, recognizing that natural gas isn't going anywhere for a while, but we have to make it cleaner.
Congressman Kinzinger, what's an issue that we can come together and try to help advance that's top of mind for you?
Yeah, it's nuclear. I have 4 nuclear power plants in my district, 8 reactors, 2 of which are on the chopping block in the next few years. And you think about the jobs, the economic impact that has, as well as, the intellectual impact. And you think of the impact on the energy sector and the energy grid. So I have a preserving existing energy infrastructure act, which would give credits to help keep basically nuclear alive. Secondarily, if the nuclear plant closes, it actually takes some of the fees collected and puts it to the community to lessen the impact. I think nuclear is an issue that we can all work together, including nuclear storage. I know Scott and I are supportive of Yucca Mountain. I think we need to go back to the board and remind people that that's already been paid for by ratepayers, and it's very important and safe, et cetera. So that's it. That's what I would say. Nuclear power to me, and in terms of at this moment, is probably one of the more important things on energy, but there's a whole host of them that we've explored some of.
Yeah, so I'll make a commitment. I can only speak on behalf of the chamber, so I'll make a commitment on behalf of the chamber. We'll look at your methane bill, Congressman Peters. We'll see what we can do there, and Congressman Kinzinger, we'll look at the nuclear and see what we can do there. And I think one of the things that all of us have to do to begin addressing these challenges is just lean in a little bit. We have to be more forward-looking, more willing to take on issues, to go places we maybe normally wouldn't go. Congressman Peters, you went to Houston, right? That's maybe not a place you would normally visit, but being willing to go to talk to people we maybe don't often talk to figure out how we can find that common ground. So I want to thank you both for joining us. I'm going to give you each just a last parting word, if you'd like, and then I know you probably got to fill up on that black coffee and maybe another shot of espresso. So Congressman Kinzinger, any final comments from you?
No, just look, thanks for having me. And, we all need to take ownership of the climate, both our actual climate and the political climate. So let's do that together. Thanks for having me. Good to see you, Scott.
Well said, Adam. I agree. It's an honor to work with you. I wish there were more people who thought like this in Congress or were willing to think like it and say so. And I think the chamber can play a big role in that too. So I appreciate the constructive conversation that the chamber's leading today, and hope to be involved in more.
Well, you can both count on it. We do believe that there's a role for the chamber and for the business community at large in just fostering these type of conversations. Maybe we heard an idea today that we hadn't heard before. It's an opportunity for exploration. If nothing else, we witness the type of civil conversations, the discussions that go back and forth way more often than any of us realize, and certainly more often than you'll ever see on cable news, when you're joined by lawmakers like Congressman Peters and Congressman Kinzinger. So to both of them, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for what you do to help bridge the partisan divides and frankly try to find common ground for solutions. To our audience, thank you for tuning in. Tune in next month for our 4th installment in the series. And to our friends at Common Grounds, thank you for the great coffee. Thank you for the partnership supporting efforts like this. Have a wonderful day.